Hey guys, this is Sarah from Neuroscience Club, and this is our 2023 Brain Awareness Week event. And today I will be presenting to you guys the Criminal Minds episode of our video series. And let's jump right in the video as always. So today we'll be talking about various serial killers, criminals, and the studies and disorders that show what makes their brains run so differently than ours. So let's start with the three personality disorder clusters, and this will be cluster A, cluster B, and cluster C. So cluster A will be the odd, eccentric cluster, cluster B will be the dramatic, unpredictable cluster, and cluster C will be the anxious and fearful cluster. So under the clusters, I've listed these personality disorders that belong to the cluster, and I also wanted to mention that obviously not all individuals with these personality disorders will commit crime or are criminals. And we'll be just going through specific examples on how these disorders might affect some criminal brains and how it will change the way they think and what their thought process behind committing the crimes will be. So one of the key symptoms of the disorder is actually feeling very suspicious and not trusting anyone around you. And they would believe oftentimes that they're lying or they're trying to do something terrible to them, obviously with no evidence. And this will make them very defensive and very guarded, and they will not be able to form any relationships or friendships with other people. So one example is Dave Berkowitz, the son of Sam, who was a notorious serial killer in New York City in the 1970s. And he talked about having received orders to kill from a demon who lived inside his neighbor's dog because if not, there would be an apocalypse that would happen. And these delusions led him to actually murder people. And another example, John Hinckley Jr., who tried to assassinate Ronald Reagan. He was also diagnosed with this, and he was really into actress Jodie Foster, and he was completely in the delusion that shooting the president would impress her and she would want to be with him. And the next personality disorder is the schizoid disorder. And this is one of the key symptoms is the lack of interest in forming social relationships with other people, and they would want to be alone, and they feel like having close relationships with other people will interfere with their personal life, and so they will be perceived as cold and distant from other people. And so one of the criminals with this disorder would be Anders Breivik, who was responsible for the 2011 Norway attacks, and he carried out a bombing and a mass shooting that killed 77 people and injured over 300, and he claimed that he did this because he wanted to defend his country. And another guy, Richard Kuklinski, the Iceman, was a contract killer who also had this personality disorder and murdered over 200 people, and he has also socially isolated himself and had a lack of emotional attachment to other people. The next one is a schizotypal personality disorder, where they have difficulty forming close relationship with other peoples, and they would want to interact with other people superficially and distantly. And they would have eccentric behavior patterns such as dressing weirdly or engaging in very unusual speech patterns. So I would say a very famous example of this would be Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, a serial killer, a serial rapist who terrorized California in the mid-1980s. And he was actually diagnosed with this disorder and had a history of wearing black clothing and having a pentagram on his hand like the one I just drew. So moving on to cluster B now we have the antisocial personality disorder, and this has been known by many names throughout the course of history: psychopathy, sociopathy, and this is a complete disregard for the rights of others and a complete lack of empathy. So although under the same disorder, psychopaths and sociopaths are actually different, and psychopaths are more extreme in their behavior. They feel no guilt for their actions and even take pleasure in their violent behavior, while sociopaths, they actually do show emotional response in their actions, but they actually do not care about the suffering they cause. And a really great example of a sociopath is Anna Delvey, who is a famous con artist who actually scammed her way into the New York City elite social scene, and she racked up bills of tens of thousands of dollars at luxury hotels, stores, restaurants, and she was pretending to be a wealthy German heiress the whole time, and she had no compassion for the people she scammed. Eventually, though, individuals with this disorder are often caught because they become more reckless and irresponsible, and they move on to higher criminal actions like stealing, damaging property, acts of aggression, and they will not take responsibility for any of their actions. And they may seem charming and charismatic on the surface, but beneath they have no empathy and disregard for others. And next up, we'll be talking about the borderline personality disorder. And this is characterized by strong emotions, mood swings, and difficulties with self-identity and relationships with others. People with disorder often experience intense and unstable emotions that are very difficult to live and cope with, and this leads to impulsive behavior, for example, substance use and self-harm. And they also might have self-identity problems and a really deep fear of abandonment. So some celebrities that have BPD are Pete Davidson, a comedian and actor, and Demi Lovato, a singer and actress. And the histrionic personality disorder is a pattern of attention-seeking behavior, and people with this disorder often really want attention, and they would do a lot of different things to get these attention. For example, dressing provocatively or flamboyantly. They would speak in a dramatic manner, and they would exaggerate their emotions, and they would very care a lot about what other people think of them, and be very concerned with how they look, and they will be very easily bored, and they will always be sensing out like new experiences, new sensations, new things they can do. And lastly, we have the infamous narcissistic personality disorder. And criminals with this disorder might have a grandiose sense of self-importance. They would believe that they're special and unique, and they only associate with other people like them. They would want admiration and attention, and they would be very entitled. They would be preoccupied with their fantasies of success, power, attractiveness. And obviously, these things can play a huge part in committing crime. So now let's move on to what research has shown, how their brain is physically different than ours. And so they will often have a lack of activity in their prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for their personality and cognition. And also they would have a reduction in their gray matter in their brain. And this relates to the PFC, the amygdala, which is responsible for emotions, and the hippocampus, which is responsible for memory. One interesting contradiction to note, though, is that although their amygdala has reduction in how it functions, they would seem to have an enhanced emotional response to the suffering of other people, which is definitely something that will be looked into in the future. Meanwhile, thank you guys so much for watching our Murder Mystery Criminal Minds episode, and I hope you guys have a great day.